Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Fantasy Friday. Today, we will be reading chapters 25 and 26 of The Tiger and the Wolf. Now, within this story, when we left off last time, we left off with a cliffhanger. Right at the very end, we had all of the tribes come to the stone place, the sacred place for all the different tribes, and Maniye met up again with her father, Akrit Stone River, and the priest Kalameshli takes iron. And Akrit was not very happy. He wanted to do something to Maniye. We're not sure what. Something happened. They were both very angry, and at the very end, they both stepped into their wolf forms, and something happened. So let's find out what happens as we read chapter 25. The snake priest stood up abruptly, ritual words forgotten. Asmander stared at him uncertainly. Hespric Essenskis had been seeking the serpent within the earth, digging deep with his mind to find and wake his buried god. He had been speaking softly, familiar words of faith that left Asmander oddly homesick. Strange how he had not really felt that strained tether that was trying to draw him back south until he had run into his remainder of that other invisible world. Until then, he had felt more as if he was running away. Now the old man was on his feet, benediction forgotten, staring off towards the stones. Messenger, Asmander addressed him formally, has the serpent spoken to you? Something is wrong. It emerged as just a murmur from those withered lips, but he caught it. Without warning, the old priest was off, hurrying away and leaving Asmander caught between a desire to follow and the old understanding that there were deeds of priests that other men were best not knowing about. In the end, he followed, though. Even as he set off, he felt as though the ground beneath him was suddenly treacherous, as though the swamp itself was rising to reclaim it. He felt a great and unseen fracture threatening in the sky. Hespric was hurrying, or as much as he could, to where a scattering of huge men loomed around a tent. They were all on their feet, looking puzzled and sullenly angry, but uncertain, too, glowering around for whatever had disturbed them. One or two of them stepped, surging into even larger forms that grunted and shook their heads and bared their fearsome teeth at each other. Asmander had never encountered a bear, but he knew one when he saw it. The stories he had heard about the North did not do them justice. The flap of the tent rippled, and then a woman shouldered her way out, as big as the men and clad in a vast robe of hides that was sewn all over with bird skulls. Her broad, flat face was turned up to the clouds, and Asmander saw her sniff the air. Her expression was unreadable, totally closed to outside scrutiny. Hespric stumbled to a halt, head turning left and right, but plainly not finding what he was looking for. Then Asmander saw a flurry of movement over towards the stones themselves, a fleet, low shape skimming the ground, a small, grey-pelted wolf with a greater beast behind it. He took it for a ritual, a mock hunt invoking of the greater wolf they set such stock on here. Hespric let out a sharp hiss, and Asmander understood that this was no piece of religious theater. The smaller wolf tried to break away towards them, but its pursuer got in front of it, herding it away, driving it towards the stones themselves. Hespric took a deep breath and began to hurry towards them, but Asmander could see that the hunt would be at an end long before the serpent could intervene. And here, old and frail and far from his own places of power, what could he do anyway? Then the little wolf was at bay, trapped with its back to the ring of stones, and Asmander saw it shift into a girl, and its pursuer turn into Akrit's stone river. By then, Venator and Shiri had caught up with him, both of them equally baffled by what was going on. Wondered when he'd show his face, the old pirate grunted. You going to ask him to lend you some warriors? Looks like a perfect time. Stop your lips flapping for once, Asmander told him tautly.
Can't you feel it?
It was plain that Venator couldn't, but to Asmander it was as though the entire island, all the invisible, roiling presences that had gathered here, were bending close to see what the two wolves would do next. Maniye could feel the stone circle at her back, like a fire. Her heart was hammering as though she had run herself ragged for 2 full days. Before her, her father appeared like a monolith himself, as heavy and intractable as the stones. She could see careful movement as the others fanned out to ensure she did not try to slip aside. There would be Smiles without teeth and her father's other hunters, and old Kalameshli, all the antagonists of her childhood.
Child, come here!
Stone River ordered her flatly. He was holding his temper by a thin thread, but he still held it. She bared her teeth, those silly, blunt human teeth. I'm not a child. I passed my trials.
You are my blood! You are my tribe! You are born within the shadow of the wolf, he told her. You have a purpose, for the wolf and for me.
He threw a hand out towards her.
Come here!
It exerted a terrible gravity, that hand. It tugged at her and at all her memories, reminding her of every time she had tried to defy him, reminding her of why she had gone from day to day trying to stay out of even the corner of his eye. But she fought against it. I am Many Tracks. I hunt alone. She did not say, like Broken Axe, and she was uncomfortably aware that Broken Axe himself was nowhere she could see.
You are no hunter!
And he was a step closer, not with a sudden movement, but just a casual shuffle, till that hand was within a lunge of grabbing her. She could feel the stone place's presence all about her. She felt as though the whole island held its breath. I am Many Tracks, she repeated. I do not accept you as my chief. She choked off the word father. I leave the winter runners. I am a tribe of one alone until I choose another. She did not know how she knew the words so well. When had she ever heard them recited? Still, they were the correct words. They were the words of her rights, as one born to the wolf. Let her leave her tribe. They might hunt her, they might drive her away or even kill her, but they could not force her to be one of them. But she saw from her father's face that this was not his understanding, and that, in his mind, she was still a possession of his. He had his use for her, and he would not let her go. She learned then how fragile tradition was when set against human ambition. He was the chief of the winter runners, so who would gainsay him? Girl! He said, and then he had lunged for her, the hand darting in to claim its property, and she stepped and ran in the only direction he had left her. She fled inside the circle, and he followed on his own wolf feet. The feeling was like a hammer blow, like running into a gale. She had made a terrible mistake. She was no priest, able to run through the eye of the gods like this. She was cursed. Surely she was cursed. Time seemed to stretch, her dash across the stone circle becoming a trek of hours. She could feel them all in their sharp-edged scrutiny. The hungry, drowning spirit that made this place its own, the killing, cold gaze of winter, the impassive distance of the mountains, the vast expanse of the sky, the stars, the moon. Beneath all these, the little huddle of totems that actually recognized the people of the crown of the world seemed terribly small. Still, they were closer, close enough to touch. She sensed their hostile regard, their outrage. Bear, deer, boar, seal, all of them drawing back in horror, preparing their condemnation of her. Beyond them, two others circled, always at opposite edges of the circle, constantly stalking one another. Wolf and tiger. For a terrible moment she thought they might make her choose then and there. But no, they kept at their pacing, watching her. They waited to see what she would do. There was a groaning weight of fear on her shoulders the moment she understood what she had done, and yet Tiger and Wolf just circled and watched. She was at the very center of their circle, and her legs wanted to give up. She was ready to lie down on her side and simply die. This was the will of all the great and distant spirits. A speck had crossed into their sight, and they wanted it gone. She faltered, misstepping, feeling something clench about her heart like a clawed hand. The inside of the circle became like a maze of unseen walls. Abruptly, she had lost her bearings. She could not find her way out. The hot breath of Akrit Stone River behind her seemed infinitely less frightening than what she had blundered into. But there seemed to be a line across the ground, within her sight. A crooked line, but a path none the less. It was picked out by a shadow, as though something long and twisted was coursing beneath the earth. A foreign presence, as unwelcome as she was, and yet, though the wolf might dig and the boar root, they could not bring it into the light. Her feet lit on the track of that shadow, and then she had found her stride again. Akrit's teeth closed on thin air, and she was out of the circle. She had only seconds. The other winter runners, Akrit's entourage, had split on either side of the stones to flank her, and Akrit was right at her back still. She had been driven away from the bear camp, as if they would have aided her, and surely, at any moment, Broken Axe would appear before her to head her off. It was what he did, after all. He was the hunter who knew the mind of his prey every time. And then there was a sudden flurry of violence behind her, and Akrit was no longer at her back. On her left, Smiles without teeth veered away to help his chief, and she cut across where his path would have taken him, pulling away from her pursuers on the other side. She had a brief, blurred glimpse of Akrit and another wolf tumbling over and over, snapping at one another's throats. Akrit had seen the brief blur of motion from the corner of one eye, even as he was about to edge into a final burst of speed and overrun the girl. Something in that flash of gray told him everything he needed to know. Not one of his people coming in to head Maniye off, but an enemy. An enemy born also in the shadow of the wolf. There was only one man it could be. He veered away so that Water Gather's fangs just grazed his flank instead of latching onto his leg, and then he had twisted to lunge back, the two of them rising briefly to their hind legs to snarl and snap at each other, before going down, locked together, forepaws tearing, muzzle twisting past muzzle, as they tried to get their teeth around something vital of their opponent.
He must be mad to dare this!
Akrit was now on the defensive, giving ground and stunned by the sheer presumption. Impressed, almost. He would not have thought that Water Gathers had the warrior's courage to brave the taboos of the island like this. Another thought came, and he lost another handful of paces, retreating from his antagonist, knowing that some of his people were hanging back around him, unsure whether to aid him or not, or kept back by Water Gather's own bodyguard.
What if he isn't the transgressor? What if it's me?
There had been Kalameshli plucking at his sleeve, trying to restrain him, but the girl had been right in front of him, and she had disobeyed him. She had the temerity to tell him no. She was his daughter, wilful runt that she was. She was his, to do with as he wished. He lunged without warning at Water Gathers, a brief low duck, as though he was about to submit, and then jaws agape at the other wolf's neck, forcing him back. And yet the girl was an adult now. By the wolf's ways, she was free to take up the lone life, and to come and go as she pleased, to live or die by her own meager skills, if that was what she chose. But Akrit needed her. He needed her as his weapon against the tiger. In his mind, his three prizes circled and circled like distant hawks in the sky: the high chiefdom, control of his daughter, final victory over the tiger. He had lost track of which he wanted most. He knew only that these three goals were interdependent, and that he was Akrit Stone River of the Winter Runners, and he would have them all. The wolf was always hungry. The wolf was never satisfied. With that, he gained an access of strength and speed, leaping on Water Gathers and drawing blood about the other wolf's snout, tearing with his teeth, heedless of the claw raking that he took in return. Then Water Gather stepped, a human in an instant, his hand coming down and the morning light gleaming on his axe blade. Akrit matched him shape for shape, catching the arm and wrestling him over the weapon, the two men staggering back and forth, now one of them in control, now the other. There were voices, he knew. He heard them distantly. Voices of men, though, and right then he was not interested in their opinions. Priests were calling for them to be stopped, but the warriors of both wolf tribes were guarding the fight, the decision coming upon them all at once that this personal conflict had become something more, something divine. The chiefs of the Winter Runners and the Many Mouths were mad for each other's blood, here at the stone place, and surely this was the gods' plan. Then Water Gathers had twisted away from his grip, with the axe cocked back to strike or to throw. Akrit sent a kick thundering into the hard muscles of his opponent's stomach, so that the other man reeled away, gasping, swiping meekly with a blow that Akrit deflected with his forearm. For a moment his hands found purchase, behind the knee, at the elbow. Then he had dropped his weight under Water Gathers and thrown him in a perfect demonstration of warrior's art, a display of experience over youth. Maninli's son landed well, though, on one knee, and then lurched back onto his feet, drawing the axe back again. But Akrit was a wolf once more, even as Water Gathers had been flipping through the air, and he came up under the man's striking reach, too close for the axe blade, and clamped his jaws about his enemy's throat. The rush of blood down his throat filled him with fire. He could not have said if he had planned to kill the other man, rather than just shake him into submission, but with that blood in his mouth a terrible rage rose in him, the wolf's own fury. He shook and he worried and he slammed the man down, so that the axe bounced away and clinked against the altar. Water Gathers was scrabbling at his eyes with soft human fingers, but Akrit twisted and savaged and choked, until the struggles of his enemy grew weaker and weaker, lack of air, loss of blood. And he himself grew stronger. He felt the wolf decant the man's strength into him, a ladleful at a time. And when the son of Meninli was dead, he saw at last that his throw, his leap, had carried them both back into the circle of the stones, and he felt the whole world of the invisible poised above him, like a mountain waiting to fall. He knew he should despair that he had done such a thing in this place. He knew he should cower in terror. But he was born in the shadow of the wolf. He was the hunter, the warrior, the spiller of blood. Fear was not his way. So he lifted his head to the angry purpled skies and howled out his defiance, his triumph, and outside the circle the other wolves howled too, Winter Runner and Many Mouths together, and the cry was taken up across the island, tribe by tribe, until every son and daughter of the wolf was giving vent to that long, lonesome call. Triumph and melancholy in one, the voice of winter, the cry of the wolf. Maniye had not looked back. The absence of her father in immediate pursuit was not enough to make her slow. He would be there right behind, she knew, or some of his people. If she slowed, if she let curiosity best her, then he would take her. But then she was seeing the murkiness of the marsh ahead of her, the heaped earth of the island running out, and her straight course became a curve that brought others into her sight. She had thought that they would be looking at her. She had pelted between the stones, stirred up the gods. But no, they were still looking towards the circle, and a single fleeing wolf girl was nothing to them. And then she could not stop herself. She looked back and saw that none of the winter runners was there. Instead, they were gathered before the stones, and within. She witnessed the last moments of the fight. She saw Akrit Stone River triumph over his enemy, and then throw his bloody muzzle up to the sky to give vent to his victory. The other throats that joined with him took on a single voice that stabbed at the crowded sky and made it something that usurped all that it touched, driving the gods and spirits before it, pushing them away from their own place until only Wolf was left, ringing in every ear. She felt it deep inside her, where her wolf soul was. She wanted to add her own howl to that chorus, to become part of the pack that she had just forsworn. The need was something external to her, and yet it was strong. She felt herself being shaken in its jaws. But she put her head down and forced herself on through it, knowing only now, I am my only master. Around her, she saw the more timid of the others already moving for the causeway. The coyote and the deer, the stocky men of the boar, they packed their tents and left, or else just fled and abandoned what they could not pick up in that moment. She could smell their fear, the rich savor of it. The wolf was loose and gone mad, after a generation where they had lived mostly in peace, even under the wolf's shadow. She saw a handful of men of the Eyrie simply take flight, stepping up into the air in a clap of wings. And she dashed past them all and through their camps, leaping over their fires and darting around their sleds and piled packs, and not one of them called after her or tried to stop her. She was Wolf, for all she was no part of what Akrit had done. She breathed out dread and trailed fear behind her. Then there was another camp ahead, and she saw a sudden flurry of activity there. Men and women in bronze-scaled mail spreading out, bearing short curved knives and hatchets, hefting slender javelins. They did not scatter, nor did they reek of fear. The tiger, she saw. This was the camp of the tiger. My people. And it was only when the first javelin flew that she realized they did not know her. They saw only Wolf. That had been their enemy before, and would be so again. She twitched aside from the cast and stepped, knowing already that she was too close, that the next throw might pin her to the earth. Her panic sent her straight into human form, abruptly running far faster than she was capable of on two legs, stumbling and tripping, hurtling head over heels. Instinct took over then, and she realized only that she had landed on her feet, and that they were the feet of a tiger. The tiger warriors were staring at her, most of them, save for a couple still gazing out towards the circle. She forced herself into her human shape again, desperate to speak. Please, I'm you. She had meant to say, one of you, or one of yours. But it came out muddled. Please, and the irrevocable step. Take me with you. There was a woman there, the same tall priestess Maniye had seen in the circle. The others deferred to her, and her green eyes bored into Maniye's soul. There was a moment of stillness between them, each studying the other. Like the bear, the people of the tiger looked different to the rest of the crown of the world. Their eyes, their sharp chins, their skins with just a touch of the coppery plains color. They wore their hair pulled back and braided into long tails, laced with gold and gleaming stones. We leave now, the tiger priestess declared. She comes with us. And, at the snarling looks from some of her followers, there is a story here, and I will know it. Not the most reassuring of words, but better than her turning Maniye away. She was bitterly aware that she was abandoning Hesprick. She could only hope that he would be safe with the bear tribe. Surely they were proof against the depredations of the wolf? If she could have carried him with her, she would. But there was no chance, no choice. The world brooked no delay. The tiger carried what she had taken for large shields or curved drums, but when they reached the water's edge, they turned them upside down and made boats of them. The eggshell things seemed far too fragile to trust her weight to, but everyone else there was larger than she was, and none of them hesitated. She did, just for a moment, a heartbeat, looking back at the island, at the stones, at the unseen roiling host of spirits that was rising up like startled birds. She looked for something slender and serpentine, sliding towards her. She looked for a haggard old man with his bald head covered. She saw neither. So she let herself be steadied in one of the craft, the priestess squeezing up beside her, embracing her close against the chill of her mail. Then the woman had taken up a short paddle, and she, and all the tigers there, were making their way across the cloudy waters of the marsh, away from the howls of the wolf. And that concludes chapter 25. So, Maniye managed to escape Akrit with help of water gatherers who ended up giving his life for the cause. So, now Maniye's on a boat going away with the tiger. She met up with them and is just taking off with them. So, let's see what happens now. Chapter 26, as Maniye becomes part of her other tribe. Let's see what they have going on.
So what now?
With the taste of Water Gather's blood in his mouth, he had been exultant, defiant. He had forced down the whole invisible world. He had howled, and the wolf had howled back. Now Akrit Stone River sat and stared into the fire, and felt the same leaden despondency that often came to him after his fights and rages. The world seemed a dark and uncertain place again. He had done a terrible thing. It had been a bold thing when he was doing it. It had been what a wolf warrior should do. But now it seemed more and more a terrible thing, and he wasn't sure what to do about it.
The signs are...
Kalameshli looked grave and drawn, and yet with a new edge to him.
The spirits of this place are in turmoil. We are all in turmoil. Let them for once experience how a man lives. I don't care about them,
Akrit made himself say. It was not true, but if he said it often enough, then it might become true.
I don't care about them. They're too big, too far away, to really care about us. Isn't that what you've said? They'll just forget.
The priest's shoulders rose and fell.
This is where they come closest to the earth, where they can hear our voices. A deed done here in their full view cannot but bring repercussions. You are marked, Akrit Stone River. The powers of the world have marked you. Let them! They mark great men, do they not?
The wise man avoided the attention of the invisible world, but it was a sharp-edged knife, if he could only avoid the blade and grasp the hilt. Kalameshli's thoughts had probably run through the same twists.
The gods,
He started.
only one of them matters,
Akrit said forcefully.
Do I care that the deer resents me? Do I care if the boar carries ill will? Or even the bear? How do I stand with the wolf, takes iron? I thought, when it happened, I thought I felt him. I was inside the circle, and I felt him there, and I had done the right thing. I knew it.
That blessed moment without doubts. But doubts always crept in the end.
The wolf is watching you. What does that mean? He is following your tracks,
Old Takes Iron said.
He is following to see where you will take him. If he finds you wanting, he will bring you down. Or,
The old priest's gaze was level.
or he will hunt alongside you. Before this happened, I had spoken with the other priests from the other tribes. There have been many omens in this year. It seems a testing will come to the people and to the land. Are we to be that testing? Is it the Tiger War?
Kalameshli took a deep breath.
I think that there are only two ways to meet a test: swift feet and strong jaws. Let the coyote run.
The priest smiled slightly.
Before this day, you wanted to become High Chief because it was a role fit for you, and because you are a man who saw it within his reach.
He held up a hand to forestall Akrit's interjection.
Before this day, you wanted to bring Tiger into the wolf's shadow because you have never stopped hating the Shadow Eaters. And now? And now you must accomplish these things, or fall,
Kalameshli told him flatly.
If you are the man who can do what he boasts, then you shall bear the future aloft. You shall wrestle it and cast it down. And if you fail at these things, if you are no more than just Akrit Stone River of the Winter Runners, then the spirits that marked you here will destroy you. Do not fear for me.
But Akrit could not keep his voice entirely steady. Hearing his own uncertainty, he snarled,
Fear instead for whoever took my daughter. Tell me you have news of her. The coyote saw her go, Kalameshli said. She left with the Shadow Eaters. They will make for their strongholds in the highlands and hide her there. But Broken Axe has gone after her, Kalameshli said. He will track her wherever she goes. He will steal her back, or else he will tell you where she is so that you can start your war.
Akrit felt the world had become a torrent of water, carrying him along, carrying them all.
And the other tribes? Like the wolf, they watch, Kalameshli confirmed. But they must remember the war with the tiger. Every tribe will have its warriors who fought in it.
Akrit stood up suddenly.
You're right. This is the time to act, to seize the moment in our teeth, and see if we can tear it free. Fail at this, fail at it all. That is what you're telling me.
The priest nodded, gaze fixed on him.
Tell them to gather their warriors. Tell them the Shadow Eaters have stolen my daughter. Tell them this is an insult to the wolf, a sign that they mean to come down from the high places and rule over us again. Tell the people of the wolf to ready themselves for a summer war.
The tiger priestess was called Erichaka, and this was how her fellows addressed her. Later, Maniye learned that she had earned herself a proper name, what a wolf would call a hunter's name. But amongst the priests of the tiger, such names were kept secret and used only within their own clandestine rites. She traveled with two male servants, Red Jaw and Clubhead. They spoke seldom and stayed very close to her. Red Jaw had a sheath of javelins and a spear thrower, and Clubhead bore a knotted length of polished wood studded with bone and teeth. They wore sleeveless armor of square leather panels stitched together, which fell to their knees, while their lower legs were wrapped in cloth. There were livid marks striping their forearms. Burns, Maniye realized. Arachaka herself was clad in a cuirass of bronze scales, and she had donned a helm of the same metal with a red feather cresting it. At her belt was a curved knife and a short-hafted axe with a spike jutting backwards from the head. Altogether, the three of them cut as alien a trio as Maniye had ever seen. She reckoned that even Hesprick would seem familiar and safe when compared to them. Maniye had admitted only to the name Many Tracks. They traveled hard for the first day, pushing north and east, taking higher ground whenever it was offered. When necessary, they stepped in order to climb, one or other of the men clawing his way up with a cord about his shoulder, then hauling the boats up after them. Maniye stepped with them, without hesitation. Amongst other tigers, her tiger soul was like a comfortable garment. The idea of carrying a wolf body on her bones grew swiftly strange and unlikely to her. They took the water road whenever it was offered, their progress following a string of lakes like stones on a necklace. Each time they did so, Maniye knew, they would be laying their scent to rest, forcing any keen-nosed pursuers to dither about the shore in order to hunt them down. Still, there was one moment that she looked back, as they scaled a jagged-edged scarp of rock, and she spotted him, a pale wolf with dark shoulders, effortlessly keeping pace. She did not see him again, but after that she knew that Broken Axe would be there, marking her trail. She did not say anything to Erichaka, for she was terrified that they would turn on her and drive her away if they thought she was a liability. They pushed on hard like this for 2 days, putting much distance between them and any pursuers, before Erichaka seemed to relax a little. On the night of the second day, they lit a fire, rather than the four of them just stepping to their feline shapes and huddling close together for warmth. Clubhead built what looked like an altar over the little patch of flames, with a flat stone crowning it, laid out some fish on it, and let them cook. Erichaka now regarded her impassively, loosening the sash at her waist and beckoning Redjaw over to lift off her cuirass. "Tiger girl," she began. "Wolf girl, what does the chief of the Winter Runners want with you, that he would tear down the gods to get to you?" Maniye felt her chest clench. She had expected questions, of course, but not that they would be so well informed. 100 lies squirmed in her mind. She had been a sacrifice. She had been caught spying or stealing. She was promised to the Horse Society and must return to them. But who could say how much this priestess already knew? She took a deep breath, aware that she had already been silent for too long, and that her silence was the only sound aside from the crackling of the flames and the sizzling of the fish. All three of them were studying her intently, their eyes glittering in the firelight. Without speaking, without acting, they stripped her of layer after layer of lies that might have been until she was left only with telling the truth, or the truth as she knew it, which was all the truth she had. I am Stone River's daughter, she informed them, seeing Erachaka's eyes go wide in shock. The two men shifted postures slightly, first as if to ward against a threat, but in the next moment ready to seize her, her role now transformed from refugee to enemy. And of course, the wolf told many stories about what the Shadow Eaters did with those they captured during their raids. He said that he got me on she who was once the Tiger Queen, she forced herself to say. Redjaw hissed, baring his teeth, and Erachaka cuffed him across the face, a movement so swift and without thought that it seemed more force of habit. Then her hand lashed out and had Maniye by the throat, no, by the chin, turning her face slowly in the firelight, staring, staring. Then the grip slackened, leaving Maniye gasping out, and still pinned by that green gaze. There's not much of her in your face. You look like a wolf. And yet Erachaka was thoughtful, clearly troubled. Did you know her? Maniye pressed. Know her? The priestess weighed the words in her mouth before voicing them. She who rules the Fire Shadow people is also the closest to the tiger spirit. Whose else will should I obey? It took Maniye surprisingly long before she could say it. Will you tell me about her? No, came the swift answer. Or not now. There will come a time for many things. The next morning they had visitors. A handful more tigers arrived, and with them came a stout, copper-skinned woman dressed in a long sheepskin coat of the horse style. They appeared with a pair of stocky horses, shorter and shaggier than the beasts that Maniye was used to. There has been a change of plans, Erachaka explained to them. We have a third to come with us. The girl. The horsewoman nodded, unperturbed. Let her ride behind me. All she needs to do is hold on. The priestess took Maniye's shoulder, pulling her close. I had planned to withdraw to our lands carrying warnings of the wolf. Now it seems I shall bring them something more, no? She stared into the girl's eyes. I see here no second thoughts or regrets. Do I see right? Maniye swallowed and nodded. There was a great deal in her mind about what she was leaving behind, but so few scraps of it were good, and so much baggage she was glad to shed. She had never known her mother, for it had been right after her birth that Stone River had given the Tiger Woman over to Broken Axe to dispose of. In all her years, the people of the Tiger had seemed nothing but a night terror, an enemy, the victims in tales of heroism in battle, a name to curse by, a byword for cruelties and dishonors since avenged. That they must exist, as a real people with a real history, she could surmise, but they had never seemed as such to her, not until she saw them at the stone place. Now here she was, leaving the shadow of the wolf, crossing its penumbra into that other shadow that her mother had once cast. The other tigers would disperse by their own paths, leaving plenty of trails for any wolf hunters to follow. They would go over rugged, rough country, by water and by rock, and yet still they might be overtaken by the swift feet of the winter runners. Maniye and Erachaka, in contrast, would take a wider route along paths that the emissaries of the Horse Society had beaten out of animal trails, winding back and forth up the face of the highlands, through the dense forests to where the snow still lingered, and the tiger held court. The journey for her was a numbing one. holding tightly to the thick coat of the horsewoman as the two beasts picked their way up tracks that were nearly invisible, passing like ghosts through a landscape that grew ever more still and frozen the higher they climbed. The horses were astonishingly sure-footed, and the stocky woman whispered to them and chided them whenever they balked, promising them rest and good feed and the respect of the horse society if they did their duty. She went in front, Maniye clinging gamely on, and behind came Arachaka, riding with the ease of long practice, her boat slung from her saddle like a shield. When the night drew in, there was always somewhere close that the horsewoman already knew. A cave, a secluded hollow, a skeletal frame of wood that she pulled hides over to trap their body heat. She never spoke to Maniye, probably sensing the uncertain position the girl currently held, nor gave her name. They drew ever further from any lands that Maniye knew, traveling more east than northwards, until the hills had become forested foothills, and the sun rose over a horizon toothed with mountains. They were south of the Bear Lands, she guessed, but still climbing to where winter yet lingered, scowling down at the tides of spring that had driven it from the lowlands. Considering how matters stood between the tiger and the wolf, the image seemed appropriate. Surely by now they had left any wolf pursuit behind, and yet Maniye kept her eyes on the gloom between the trees, expecting at any moment to spot a pale wolf with a dark patch across his shoulders. In doing so, she began to notice other things. The people of the wolf built with earth and with wood, and while the cave dwellers lived beneath stone ceilings, such roofs were found and not made. Aside from monuments and monoliths, Maniye had never thought that anything substantial could be raised out of such uncooperative stuff. She had not known how her mother's people had made stone their slave. There was not much to see at first, just traces of a people vanished from these lands. Sometimes there would be a pile of rocks that seemed oddly squared off and regular. Once, butting onto the trail, she saw a big block, rounded a little by the weather, but with its uppermost side still bearing grime-highlighted carving. Then, one night, they stopped in what had been a tower before it became a ruin. The forest all about was scattered with dismembered fragments of stone, but the lower level of the structure was still mostly intact, a jagged stump like a broken tooth. It was squat and square, with each corner buttressed out with fantastical carving. They had reached it after dusk, so Maniye had only the sense of it being a pale bulk between the trees, the stones seeming faintly luminous in the moonlight, despite the encroaching fingers of moss and lichen. The horsewoman did her best to stretch some blankets over the uneven stones at the top, leaving them a cramped, dark space beneath, the ground under them lumpy and uneven from the detritus of the tower's collapse. Maniye gathered in all the driest wood she could find, for the rain had not quite been their constant companion, though a frequent guest. Still, she worked hard at it, because only for the last 2 nights had she been trusted to return if she wandered. Once a fire was lit, Maniye had a chance to view their surroundings more clearly. The nascent flames threw a leaping, ruddy light across the truncated walls all around them, and everywhere seemed carved into images that led the eye one to another. She felt that, wherever she looked, she was immediately plunged into the midst of an unfamiliar story, told using alien conventions. This carving had been intricate once, whole panels of the walls given over to abstract representations of forests, where the spaces between each tree were deeper trees, and where the forms of men and women and beasts were constantly hinted at. If she let her eyes be led, she could see battles there, and hunting and gathering of crops. She could discern worship and bloody sacrifice, the raising of great halls, the veneration of heroes and gods. And then she would become too absorbed and refocus her eyes, and not know what was truly there, or what had just been drawn out of her head. "What is this place?" she asked at last. Arachaka gave a satisfied grunt, plainly waiting for the question. "An outpost of—" a moment's pause. "Our people. Your father's warriors destroyed it, burning its beams so that the stones fell." Her face was fierce and angry in the firelight.
There are many such places as this, relics of the golden days, the days of plenty.
She meant when the tiger had ruled, before her father and the other chiefs of the wolf had broken them, in the days of Stone River's youth, and the years before she was born. Interpreting her expression, the priestess said,
You yourself will have heard only the lies, the wolf, about those days. When we are at the shining halls, you will instead hear many truths.
After a thought, she added,
And you will tell us many truths.
the shining halls had been mentioned before. Their destination was the stronghold of the tiger that the wolf's rampage had never approached.
Will you go to war against my father's people?
Maniye asked in a whisper.
Would you like that?
Arachaka turned the question back on her. Maniye regarded her across the fire for a long moment, and then nodded. And that concludes chapter 26 of The Tiger and the Wolf. So, Maniye got away. Went to go hang out with the tiger. They're heading back to their big fancy palace in Tigerland. The place the wolf has never been. And perhaps she will learn something. Arachaka seems to suggest that she will learn much, and she will also reveal much. So she's going back to her other people, finally getting a taste of the other side of the world. Perhaps she will uncover something that has been hidden from her entire life. Perhaps something else will happen. Maybe it'll go well, maybe it'll go poorly. We'll have to read on and find out. So make sure to come back again next week when we will read chapter 27 and most likely chapter 28 of The Tiger and the Wolf. So until then, enjoy your weekend, and I will see you here again next Friday at noon. Bye now.